All right, so if, let's say I gave you some frequency polygon. So let's say our points let's just do that. So if this is a frequency polygon, we know both of those start and end at 0. And then I'm just going to make up some values here. Okay, so I found that the question wasn't in how to create one of these, but how to read it. And that was the issue. If I asked you, what is the class width? How could I find that from here? Class width is just asking how far it is from one point to the next point. So you take any two successive points and subtract them. What do we get? 1.5. My class width is 1.5. Okay, if I asked you what's the midpoint of the last class? Remember, on my frequency polygon, when I made it, I had to make up points at the beginning and end so that it would connect down to 0. So on here, 0.5 and 6.5 really weren't points in my data. So the last true point on here was when x was 5. Remember, on the frequency polygon, these numbers are the midpoints. So the midpoint of my last class is just 5. What's the midpoint of the first class? 2. Does that make sense to everyone? If I said, how many classes are there? Three. Remember, the first and last one are made up. So there's only 3 actual classes here. Okay. The big thing that people had trouble with was finding upper and lower limits. If I said, what are the upper and lower limits of the first class? Okay. 2 represents the midpoint of my first class. So that meant the actual class started here and ended here. Does that make sense? I need to find those numbers. To do that, there's a couple of ways. This is the middle. You could just average those. Just like when we found the midpoint, we added 2 up and divided by 2. So if I add 0.5 plus 2, we get 2.5. Divide that by 2, and that's Okay, to get the next one, we could do the same thing, add them up, divide by 2, or we should be able to just add our class width to it. So the next one's at, where's this one? What would that one be? Yes, thank you. 2.75 makes a little more sense. So you can either add up 3.5 and 5, or you could take 2.75 and add 1.5 to it. And we get, okay, if we did it one more time, .7. Now, remember, these numbers are where each class begins. So if you had the original table of data, the first class started at 1.25, the next one ended at, or began at 2.75, the next one began at 4.25. I cannot write. The next one began at 5.75. Those are the starting points. So the first class began at 1.25. Where would it have to end if the next class begins at 2.75? Has to end at 2.74, right? It has to end before the next group begins. Does that make sense to everyone? So the big issue we had was finding the class limits when you had the midpoint. So you just have to think about what these numbers would have been. So if I said the upper and lower limits of the last class. So my 5 here really represented my last midpoint. So that one would have started at 4.25 and would end at 5.74. That's the end before the next one begins.